Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, Will Rogers once famously said, "Politics is so expensive, it takes a lot of money even to lose." Money in politics is something we talk about all the time, but there was a critical Supreme Court decision that was recently made. We're going to unpack it and explain why this could fundamentally change the equation in American politics. And I'm going to do that, of course, with Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm great. I love that Will Rogers quote. I like it better when it's said by Tom Steyer, though. Right? Losing is very expensive, as he likes to demonstrate repeatedly. But it is interesting that, you, of course, have founded your career, which continues to just ascend to new heights. But, money in politics and the intersection, we've always thought money in politics is bad. That's generally what we're told.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court said, maybe not.
Yeah. Or at least they said you have a right to do it,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about, of course, the National Republican Senatorial Committee versus the FEC. This is a case brought by, of course, Republicans, including J.D. Vance, who was then a senator. And it was on this question of the ability of political committees of parties to coordinate their activities with outside actors, including campaigns. Supreme Court ruling was 6-3. With, of course, the more conservative elements passing along the verdict in favor of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. But they did it based on a history of Supreme Court cases involving money in politics and what they regard as sort of the First Amendment. First, tell us, what does this ruling actually mean in terms of what campaigns can and can't do?
Well, basically what it says is that there is an unlimited amount of coordination between from a fiscal amount between the parties themselves and specific campaigns. There were previously limits on how much coordination could occur, and honestly, like really disparate limits, like based on the size of the race and the campaign.
Yeah.
So like the range for a Senate candidacy was anything from like hundreds of thousands of dollars up to I think $3 million based on how many people are there and everything else. And so, yeah, J.D. Vance, when he was running for Senate, was one of the people that challenged this along with other Republicans. But it is, as you just noted, the latest in a number of decisions by the court, which has kind of cleared the way for more spending in campaigns. The Citizens United case is the famous one.
Yeah, 2010.
Said any kind of campaign finance law was unconstitutional. And then the Arizona public education financing idea was dismantled. So, and then in 2014, the court struck down limits on how much money an individual can donate in national elections. And so here comes, all right, now it's going to be unlimited coordination from a spending standpoint between the party and a specific campaign. But that sort of seems like, all right, well, is that good? Is it not good? Unlimited spending. If you hear of the left, they kind of freak out a little bit. And I kind of get it, because it seems like the more money you allow to be spent in campaigns, then the more beholden the politicians are to the people with the money, which is generally something we would say is like not great.
Right.
But this actually may not be the worst thing in the world. In fact, I think there's some benefits here.
Yeah, it's interesting, by the way, on legal grounds, the Solicitor General for the Biden administration actually grudgingly admitted before this decision came out that these restrictions were probably unconstitutional. So it's interesting on legal grounds where the debate is, but in terms of...
By the way, imagine being a lawyer to a Supreme Court case, like, no, we kind of, we're not real sure.
We kind of get what the other side is
What
saying.
is your legal arguments? Vibes, mostly? It seems bad.
Right. Well, here's the question that I think everybody has to really address and understand. Isn't money always going to be part of politics? Let's assume for a second that we said we're going to have total government funding of campaigns, no private donations. That, of course, would be unconstitutional. We have a First Amendment right to free expression. The court has long held that donating to campaigns is part of that First Amendment expression. But just on a policy standpoint, let's say it's all government financed. The problem with that is, who sets the rule on who gets how much money? The politicians in office. So they're going to erect a system that benefits incumbents. And you're going to have a system that makes it very, very hard to kick somebody out of office. So any arrangement that you have that says we're going to restrict money, we're going to allow money, is going to have pitfalls and problems associated with it. And I think that's the reality. Public financing of elections is not going to do anything other than protect incumbents and the establishment from winning elections, because they get to write those rules.
And by the way, like there already were vehicles for unlimited money to be spent on candidates and campaigns. These were through super PACs.
Right.
The thing is those weren't allowed to coordinate with the campaigns. But also with some of the super PACs, if you're a 501c4, there's much less transparency. There's a lot of dark money. And that's actually why I thought, well, hey, this isn't maybe the worst thing in the world, because especially as you kind of step back and you consider and we'll talk about the specifics of George Soros. George Soros is a very famous example of someone who spends a lot of money, put his thumb on the scale, largely credited with the rise of the socialist candidates that you're seeing across the country. But when you go to cast a ballot, you only see the political party next to the candidate. You don't see who their top donors are, which super PACs they tend to receive. So on some level, the fact that the parties cannot coordinate in an unchecked way with the candidates, it seems more honest. I know it's a weird thing to say.
Oh, I agree.
But you always said, listen, when people go on TV, they should have to say on like who they're supported by, right? Because people go on and espouse these positions. People will testify before Congress from different nonprofits, and their funding is not disclosed. At least with the political parties, like you know who they represent.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it should be like NASCAR, right? I mean, you know what's on the side of the car, you know who the sponsors are. But in this case, this ruling, I think, is going to be really important as far as transparency is concerned. People can actually now know who the major backers are. So why do we say that? Well, as you pointed out, super PACs, of course, can take dark money. Dark money is money from an LLC. You and I, let's say we're both billionaires. Boy, wouldn't that be great? We could set up an LLC, the Acme LLC, and we could, through that LLC, make huge donations to all kinds of super PACs supporting all kinds of candidates. And all that anybody would ever see is Acme LLC. There's no need to disclose it. If you are a labor union, you could do the same thing using the dues. What's the difference? The difference is what this ruling does is it strengthens the political parties. Political parties can't accept anonymous donations from LLCs. They can't accept, large checks from labor unions. You have to disclose the individuals that are making the checks. And that, I think, is a crucial distinction because the bottom line is there's a huge amount of money that goes into these races that is this sort of shadow or dark money. So the New York Times looked at in 2024, the last election, they said there was $1.9 billion with a B dollars in dark money that went into the election cycle. In other words, this is money that nobody knows who actually spent it and who sent it. That's really nearly double the previous record of $1 billion in 2020. So it's trending in that direction.
By the way, that's the way everything's going. Like George Soros spent a record on individual money in campaign spending, I think 2 years ago. They're about to blow that record out of the water this midterm cycle.
Yeah, but at least we know where it's coming from. But in that 2024 election cycle, according to the New York Times, over 40% of the money that was raised from the largest Democratic Party super PACs came from dark money. 40% of their super PAC money. We have no idea who provided those funds. For the Republicans, it was roughly 20%. So this is actually going to lead to more transparency because it gives the political parties more power. It makes it transparent and out in the open, which I think is a net win.
Well, it's a win. Let me tell you who else thinks it's a win is the Republicans, because obviously this is something they brought forward. And there's some interesting dynamics here. The lawyers for the Democrats who opposed this argued that authorizing unlimited coordinated expenditures would, quote, fundamentally reshape the campaign finance regime. They said the potential for actual or apparent corruption is obvious. They're saying, okay, well, if you let the parties do whatever they want, it's potential for corruption. The Republicans are like, do you understand how political parties work? That's literally what our job is, to get these guys elected and to influence these people. So the very aim of a political party is to influence the candidates. To answer your point, very honest, very transparent. And there still are some caps when it comes to individual donations to political parties. Like an individual can top out at $44,000 a year, I think, to a specific party. And the Republicans like this because, if you just said, Democrats are getting more dark money as a percentage. The Republicans going into the midterms in 2026 are sitting in a significantly stronger financial position. They have $125 million in the bank. Democrats only have $14 million.
Wow,
which is bad.
Yeah,
they also have $18 million in debt. So they're like literally like $4 million in the hole. So Republicans like the idea, and they think this is so. Generally, everybody that says, "All right, well, Democrats, we know we've always had an advantage as far as individual candidates being able to raise money, but now Republicans seem poised to be able to take and pick and choose which races they want to intervene in and invest heavily and coordinate with the campaigns in a way they hadn't been able to do before."
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And look, I think, political parties get a lot of criticism, but they are the ones that have the candidate with their name after it, right? You're running as a Democrat or as a Republican. This will allow the parties to have more influence and more direction on, who their nominees are. So, you look at what's happening in Maine right now with Mr. Plattner, who is a complete outsider. The story is essentially a lot of outside political activists who are not part of the Democratic Party. They're really part of the Democratic Socialists of America, which this is interesting, by the way. This is the political organization that Mamdani, Bernie Sanders, AOC, everybody's involved in.
This is a big point, guys. I think the reason why we're doing this podcast is to kind of emphasize this dynamic and how it's shaping the political campaigns we see right now.
Yeah, so what's interesting about the Democratic Socialists of America, not a political party. They're a 501c4 political organization, which means what? They do not have to disclose their donors. The Democratic Party does, the Republican Party does, the Democratic Socialists of America do not, because they are not officially a political party. They are essentially a faction of the Democratic Party. And so what that means is that they can coordinate, set up these outside committees, which they do, get large people. It could be George Soros. It could be somebody else plowing money to get their person in that nomination. And the actual political party that they will be appearing on the ballot under their name has literally very little influence or direction in determining who that nominee is. So that, I think, is important because, again, it's all about transparency as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and I also think it's about, the political party. Just consider the dynamic between Democrats and socialists.
Right.
They are not the same.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's why they're Democrats, Socialists of America, and consider Graham Plattner, who may or may not be suspending his campaign. They're expecting all kinds of new bombshell allegations and revelations to come out. And even the socialists are like, no, it's bad. We should have considered this before pushing him forward. Because, the Democrat Party wanted somebody else. Chuck Schumer picked somebody else over Graham Plattner.
They wanted the governor. They wanted the current governor. What's interesting in the Democratic Party, by the way, is that there is this huge division, right? You do have a sizable proportion of Democrats who say that they are actually socialists. The party establishment says, though, you're not. So you've got this internecine warfare going on. But the point is, you need to have transparency. Whoever is backing candidates should not be able to hide behind an LLC. They should not be able to plow it into a C4, because what the Democratic Socialists of America could do is a so-called C4. They can actually give money to issue super PACs. And again, you don't know who the donors are. But let's step back for a second. I want to ask you a question, because I do think you can make a legitimate argument in the era of Donald Trump and social media and AOC and all the other things that are happening. Money does not matter as much as it once did. Right?
Well, I would say let's see Steyer Tom. Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, he literally spent 20 times as much as the next candidate in the primary for governor in California, and all he had to do, Peter Schweizer, was finish in the top 2. Yeah, and he didn't do it. Yeah, and this comes after he spent more money than anybody else in the world when he was running for president. A good friend of mine, had the good fortune of being Tom Steyer's media buyer in 2020. Let me tell you what that guy does. He makes indie films now because he's just got it like that. because those guys spend all this money. So yeah, absolutely. The money does seem to matter less. I mean, candidate matters, messaging matters, but then there's a lot of, and I would argue actually being able to chase ballots, infrastructure. Now that costs money, but that's not the same as buying an expensive ad schedule on network television during the nightly news. Yeah. You can't just plow money into a campaign anymore. Donald Trump in 2016, hugely outspent by Hillary Clinton. I think in 2024, if I'm correct, he was outspent by Kamala Harris. You had outside money coming in from Elon Musk and George Soros on either side. But the point is, money doesn't matter as much as it used to, because there's so much
media now that comes from, going on social media, right? Putting out videos. Donald Trump is on Truth Social. He's on X. They're putting out videos. That is driving the political conversation that's not necessarily monetized.
But hang on, but it does still absolutely matter. I mean, remember, you mentioned Kamala Harris. The reason why Joe Biden got out of the race is because why? All the money people said, we are no longer going to give you money unless you step down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's ultimately what it was.
It's absolutely a factor, no question about it. But I don't think it's the determining factor that it once was. That was the mother's milk of politics for, 60, 80 years. Whoever has the most money is probably going to win. And that is not true as much anymore. So you've done some interesting research on George Soros and the Soros family. There have been all sorts of reports and research done on the Soros financial network. And of course, you could look at Elon Musk on the political right. But in terms of Soros, it's interesting because a lot of statements about, dark money funding that's taking place there. But you've found some instances where they're actually directly donating the campaigns. And this guy who was in a lot of respects a capitalist manipulator made his money on currency speculation, shorting the market, shorting the British pound sterling. They give a lot of money to socialists.
They do get a lot of money to socialists. They give a lot of money to lots of things that are kind of, I would say, not necessarily positions endorsed by the mainstream Democrat Party.
Yeah.
So $15 million into pro-Hamas organizations, funding groups that were involved in the violent anti-ICE protests. You got $7 million for kind of working against prosecutors that have like hardline stances. So that was they funded the Secretary of State project. That was something they did over a decade ago. They want to put people in place that were going to be kind of like very liberal when it comes to election administration. So the money has been shaping this country and its laws in a lot of ways. And so now, so far, they've spent $102 million in the midterm election cycle. 4 years ago, the midterm record was $128 million, but they're on track to like kind of shatter that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he himself, George Soros, already put in $1 million, according to campaign finance records, of his own money. And this is part of a larger thing that the New York Post compiled. It says over $1.6 million. Anywhere from Soros is given 7 figures. I kind of feel bad. This granddaughter, Eliza Soros, gets her name in the paper for giving $500. It's like, she's like, really, guys? Yeah. I'm not exactly trying to.
Grandpa told me to do it.
I know, right? But the point is that, and this is why I think that the decision to allow parties to kind of step up in a bigger way is impactful, because you are seeing outside of this, people like George Soros matter a lot, and they're endorsing and contributing to candidates who would not have been the mainstream selection. So this guy, Abdul El Sayed in Michigan, he's gotten the AOC endorsement. He is claimed Israel is evil, or just as evil as Hamas, and he's got some kind of crazy phrases. We've talked about James Talarico in Texas. This guy Scott Cullum, who's running for Senate in Mississippi. He's getting a ton of Soros money. And so people are kind of outside of the mainstream vehicle by which we normally would see people rise up. They are funded by Soros. And on some level, this does seem like it kind of almost levels the playing field a little bit by giving more power to the parties.
Well, look, you may like the Republican Party. You may hate the Republican Party. You may like or hate the Democratic Party. But these are political organizations where people go to local precincts. They elect, people to lead the precincts. They have county parties. They have city parties. They have state parties.
That's a great point. It's decentralized.
Yeah. Well, it's decentralized. And also people pour their hearts and souls into these political movements. And then you have a billionaire come in and say, I'm going to drop $100 million. I'm going to create this organization overnight to try to intrude and effectively take over this political party because I see things differently. Now, do you have a First Amendment right to do so? I believe you actually do, but it should be transparent. You should not be able to hide through a C4. You should not be able to hide through an LLC. That's where the dark money problem comes through. This evens the playing field because it now allows political parties some of the same advantages that super PACs have, except not the hidden part. But it makes it more attractive to put money into political parties, which I think will actually strengthen democracy. Now, we have another update. We've been following the situation involving Act Blue. Act Blue, of course, is that online funding platform that, because it's blue, gives to Democrats. There is one on the right called Win Red that gives to Republicans. Act Blue has been under the spotlight because they have had, let's say, some apparently ethical lapses in terms of not being scrupulous in looking at foreign donations and making sure security's tight and up to muster, and it's led to charges and allegations that foreign or fraudulent money has entered in a big way into these political campaigns.
Yeah, another way of spelling ethical lapses, I think, Peter Schweizer, is criminal negligence. I think that's the concern, as we discussed in a
what they're investigating
in a previous podcast. Like when the lawyer, who I think it was the law firm that they represented, it was Covington Burling,
yeah.
And the lawyers for Covington Burling, which is like an elite law firm, is telling the CEO of ActBlue, you should find additional legal counsel because you are facing like very real allegations here. It's a serious thing.
Yeah, it is a serious thing. So an update, the Texas Attorney General's office has been investigating ActBlue. There's also been investigations, I think, with the Department of Justice and with congressional committees with oversight. Turns out that ActBlue has said, we fixed all the problems. You cannot give gift card donations anymore. Now, the problem with a gift card donation, right, is you could go, and it's been demonstrated easily be done. You could go and get $8,000 worth of gift cards at Walmart, and doesn't matter what the name is, it's anonymous. You could go online and donate to ActBlue, make up a name, and donate that money, thereby bypassing the disclosure requirements. ActBlue said, no, we've solved that. We've taken care of. No more gift card donations allowed. Well, it turns out Ken Paxton's office in Texas did a little experiment in February of this year after ActBlue claimed they had closed this loophole.
They tightened it up. We've cleaned it up. No more problems to see here for ActBlue.
Yeah, according to filings in court, the Texas Attorney General's office went to a retail establishment, didn't say which one, bought a group of physical gift cards with cash, and then went on to make multiple donations to multiple candidates for state office in Texas under fictitious names using these gift cards, thereby demonstrating this is not true, that this gift card safety loophole has not been closed. The big concern here, of course, is foreign donations, right, which has been a problem with ActBlue. It's also been a problem with Zorhan Mamdani. He received at least 170 contributions from overseas. Many of those were illegal. He had to return some of those donations. He, by the way, himself and his campaign did not undercover those. It was the New York City Campaign Finance Board. But this is another major problem about how our campaigns are financed. These are easy security procedures for campaigns, for Mamdani's campaign, for ActBlue to put into place. Basic security requirements that Amazon and a whole host of online retailers use. They don't use them. Why? Because they don't want to use them. They want as much money flowing in, and if they're a little bit shady, they're willing to look the other way because they want the campaign money.
No, it's very much like what incentive does ActBlue have to actually kind of crack down on this, if not for the possible legal repercussions, which their CEO is very much in the business of finding out about right now. And so anytime anyone says, oh, this is the Republicans going after a political enemy, they're going after a source of money. But the reality is, what incentive would ActBlue? They keep 4%. Now, it might not be, 4% might not seem like a lot, but 4%,
you run $1 billion through there,
yeah,
which they do. That's $40 million in fees that they're collecting.
And 4% of more money is more than 4% of less money, right? I mean, so they don't care if it's foreign money. Right. They don't care if it's donations that are fabricated in terms of the name. Like all they see is the money.
Yeah.
And so if you're a candidate, you want all the money you can get. If you're ActBlue, you're making money, the more money comes in there. So, yeah, what incentive do they actually have? And just to show you, we've previously discussed how with with food stamps.
Yeah.
So the states, when there's fraudulent transactions with the states, there was a similar kind of like lack of incentives for cracking down because everyone makes money off of it. Even the credit card companies themselves make money off the swipe fees. And if the cards get stolen, they make money off reissuing the things. Now, the Trump administration has changed that. And so much so that even states like Florida are facing $1 billion in penalties for having error rates above the threshold that the Department of Agriculture said has to happen. So it just shows you they're absolutely kind of changing the incentive structure as a way of making the process more secure, more transparent, more honest, more ethical. That hasn't happened yet for ActBlue, but it will take something like that because as long as they make money, no matter how much, as long as their revenue is tied to the increase in revenue coming through the system, then why would they change it?
Yeah, well, this is follow the money. We talk about this all the time, involving government corruption, disincentives to deal with fraud, et cetera. We're going to continue to track that broader story, and we're certainly going to continue to track campaign finance and money flowing into politics. We personally believe it's all about transparency. That's the key element here. You need to know where the money's coming from that's financing these campaigns. And I think the Supreme Court decision helps in that way. It incentivizes the transparency as opposed to the dark money flow of funds. Well, we appreciate you, as always, taking the time to listen to this podcast. Please go to thedrilldown.com to see the kind of research that we're doing. Also, please consider subscribing to this podcast. We appreciate your time. We know it's valuable. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.